Hey everyone, I just wanted to make a comment really quickly today about an old quote from a Catholic nun that's recently resurfaced and that's trending on social media as people circulate it in order to try to make an argument against the pro life or anti abortion position in that never ending controversy. Specifically, this is a quote that was made by a nun named Sister Joan Chittister, if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. And here it goes, and I quote verbatim: I do not believe that just because you're opposed to abortion, that makes you pro-life. In fact, I think in many cases, your morality is deeply lacking if all you want is a child born, but not a child fed, not a child educated, not a child housed. And why would I think that you don't? Because you don't want any tax money to go there. That's not pro-life, that's pro-birth. We need a much broader conversation on what the morality of pro-life is. End of quote. Now, the good sister's statement is an interesting one, and I think that the general sentiment behind what she's saying is correct. It's not enough, if you're someone who values human life at all stages, then it's not enough simply to say, oh, well, you can't abort a baby in utero, but then not do anything to needy mothers in particular, to help needy mothers, I should say, to take care of these children once they're born in cases where the need for that help is shown. However, there's a very fundamental flaw and misconception at the heart of Sister Chittister's statement. She stated, you're not really pro-life if you don't want to help, feed, clothe, and house the children who are not aborted. And she says, because you don't want any tax money to go there. Well, the problem with that statement, with that part of her critique and her quote, is that it assumes that the only way to help needy people, including needy mothers, is through government intervention. But that is a major misconception, right? Now, there's a whole debate to be had about whether civil society, private charity, voluntary cooperation are really enough by themselves to give needy and vulnerable people in society all of the help that they need, as often or as comprehensively as they need it. Now, as a libertarian, I believe that government intervention is not morally superior to personal direct assistance to the less fortunate. If you are simply sitting back and allowing a central authority like a government to take a portion of your earnings and redistribute those earnings or that portion of those earnings to others who need it, you're not really showing any moral agency on your own. The fact that you support those policies doesn't make you any more compassionate or generous than those who might oppose them, at least not necessarily. The reason is that it is possible to oppose those kinds of policies on the grounds that they're based on coercive taxation, coercive seizing of people's earnings from them without their consent, and then redistributing them to others without the consent of the original owners of those resources, of those assets. But actually helping people directly by choice is morally superior to that, because you are actually making a personal sacrifice of your own resources, and you are doing it by choice. You're actually getting off your rear end and doing your own personal part to help out those of your fellow citizens who are in need. Obviously, to me it's obvious at least, that kind of activity, that kind of voluntarism is morally superior to simply sitting back and letting the government take care of your fellow man for you. And the mere fact that the government is doing this with your tax dollars doesn't change the fact that you are not showing any agency in that circumstance. You're just sitting back and allowing the government to take care of it. That's not really compassion in my view. And it's certainly not morally superior, or at least not necessarily morally superior, to those who support, to those who oppose those kinds of policies. Now, I think it's correct to say that if you're going to oppose abortion, then you owe some kind of support to a lot of needy women who otherwise would have abortions for financial reasons, right? But that doesn't mean that assistance has to come from government. I personally am not convinced that civil society can handle the burden of taking care of the less fortunate all by its lonesome. With a heavy heart, I can see that there has to be some government role in providing assistance to the needy. But that doesn't mean that that role should not be kept as efficient, streamlined, and minimal as possible. Nor does it mean that we should not seek to the greatest extent possible to help out our fellow men and our fellow women voluntarily and directly, instead of just sitting back and allowing the government to shift money around ostensibly in our names and on our behalf. When it comes to abortion, I know for a fact that a great many pro-lifers actually do support the idea of helping women in these positions, women facing crisis pregnancies, as they're often called, to get through their pregnancies, childbirth, and to provide them with support after the fact. I'm personally acquainted with a number of pro-lifers, particularly religious ones, who have donated of their own time and their own money to these causes. They've even worked or volunteered at crisis pregnancy centers and other similar organizations to try not only to persuade women not to have abortions, but also to give them the help that they need to get through the pregnancies and the childbirth and to help rear their children once they're born. Now, I've heard a lot of criticisms of crisis pregnancy centers, mainly that they spread a lot of medical misinformation to pregnant women in order to convince them not to have abortions. I agree that that's wrong. Any misinformation that they spread is unjust, and there's nothing wrong with pointing that out. I join critics of crisis pregnancy centers in pointing that out. However, the fact remains, other than that, as long as they are offering assistance to women facing crisis pregnancies, then those are the kinds of pro-lifers who are walking the pro-life talk. These are the kinds of pro-lifers to whom Sister Chista's criticism does not apply, right? You can bray all you want about how, say, pro-life Republican politicians are hypocrites because they don't want to put tax money toward helping pregnant women or single mothers or what have you. But you don't know for a fact that all pro-lifers support simply preventing abortions and then leaving pregnant women facing crisis pregnancies in the lurch once the children are born. As a matter of fact, many pro-lifers do not fit that profile. Many of them are not guilty of that kind of hypocrisy. So for all those pro-choicers out there who are, bandying about this nun's quote as if it's some sort of smoking gun in the debate over abortion, I would caution you to take a second look at the whole situation, okay? Simply supporting government assistance to pregnant women or needy people generally does not necessarily make you more compassionate, and the mere fact that pro-lifers generally don't want public money to go to a lot of these causes does not prove that they don't support helping pregnant women or women who have just given birth to babies whom they might otherwise have aborted. You have to look at their actual track record and see whether they might support voluntary, charitable methods of helping out these women. And that's the thing about accusations of hypocrisy generally. They're really ad hominem personal criticisms. At the end of the day, pointing out that someone is a hypocrite does not necessarily prove that that person's point of view, that person's actual substantive position on a given issue is wrong in and of itself. It simply proves that that person has not lived up to his or her own principles. That person is not walking his or her own talk. But even if you can show that, that doesn't necessarily prove that the position they've taken is wrong in and of itself. Proving that the messenger is a hypocrite does not prove that the message itself has no merit. For example, Thomas Jefferson is best remembered for having said, all men are created equal. Yet, of course, he didn't really live up to that principle in his own life because he owned slaves and he never freed them. But does that mean that the principle that all men are created equal is wrong in and of itself, simply because its most famous proponent did not live up to it? I think not. There's a difference between the personal credibility of the messenger and the validity of the message. Even if you point out that your opponent is a hypocrite, you haven't necessarily refuted your opponent's belief. So keep that advice in mind, folks, and keep that in mind as you go forward and wade into the waters of debate on this always thorny subject. Looking forward to hearing your feedback. Peace out.